There are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and a passive-aggressive letter from your homeowners association. My name is Jack Riley, and for the last 5 years, I've been living in a beige-colored slice of suburban paradise called Prestigious Meadows. Don't let the name fool you. The only thing prestigious about it is the level of scrutiny applied to the height of your grass and the approved shades of taupe for your mailbox. I'm a software engineer, which means I work from home in a state of caffeinated seclusion. My life runs on logic, code, and the quiet hum of a well-behaved server. I like order. I like efficiency. I willingly signed the HOA documents when my wife, Sarah, and I bought the house. I skimmed the CC and Rs, a document with the heft and narrative excitement of a telephone directory for a medium-sized city, and figured, how bad can it be? It's a contract, and I understand contracts. You agree not to paint your house like a Jackson Pollock painting, and they agree to make sure your neighbor doesn't build a 10-foot-tall animatronic flamingo in his front yard. A fair trade, I thought. The architect of this contract, the unseen warden of our beige prison, was a woman named Brenda. I'd never formally met her, but I knew her intimately through her monthly newsletter, Brenda's Beacon. It was a masterclass in weaponized pleasantries. An issue might start with a lovely recipe for lemon bars and end with a friendly reminder that trash cans left on the curb for more than 3 hours past pickup would result in fines, public shaming, and possibly a plague upon your house. Each threat was punctuated with a cheerful smiley face, a digital grin that felt less like friendliness and more like the bared teeth of a predator. One memorable line read, "A gentle nudge to our fellow residents. The approved list of garden gnomes is available on the community portal. Let's keep Prestigious Meadows looking prestigious, not pathetic." I didn't even own a garden gnome, but I felt a sudden, fierce urge to buy the most garishly inappropriate one I could find. I had managed to fly under Brenda's radar for 5 years. My lawn was mowed, my hedges were trimmed, my mailbox was the correct shade of taupe-adjacent ecru. I was a model citizen of the meadows. My quiet life of coding and coffee was undisturbed, until the lilac letter arrived. It was nestled between a credit card offer and a water bill, an envelope of such a cloyingly cheerful purple that it could only be a harbinger of doom. I opened it. It was a new addendum to the bylaws, hot off Brenda's printer. I read the keyline aloud to Sarah as she wrangled our 2 kids into their shoes for school. "To preserve the serene morning ambience of our community," I began, my voice dripping with the theatrical gravity it deserved. "All gas-powered landscaping activities, including but not limited to mowing, edging, and leaf blowing, are strictly prohibited before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m. Sarah, wrestling a sneaker onto our son's foot, barely looked up. "Okay, so mow on Saturday." I stared at her, aghast. "You don't understand. This isn't about scheduling. My entire workflow is built around a 9:30 a.m. mowing session. I code from 6 to 9, clear my head with some honest fossil fuel-burning yard work, then get back to it. It's a sacred ritual." "It's mowing the lawn, Jack. It's not a sacred ritual." "It is now," I said, holding up the lilac paper like a declaration of war. "This is an attack on logic. The sun, the heat, the humidity, they don't care about Brenda's serene ambience. This is an arbitrary decree from a woman whose biggest life decision is choosing the font for the monthly newsletter. It's not about the time, Sarah. It's about the principle. It's about Brenda from her ivory tower of beige siding, dictating the RPM of my lawnmower blade." Sarah just sighed and handed me a lunchbox. "Just don't get us kicked out of the neighborhood, okay?" I looked out the window at my perfect green lawn. A battlefield in the making. "No promises," I muttered. A week passed. The Texas weather, in a rare act of kindness, decided to be perfect. The sky was a crisp, cloudless blue. The humidity had taken a day off, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the perfectly symmetrical crepe myrtle in my front yard. It was 9:45 a.m. on a Thursday. My lawn, which had been patiently waiting, was now just a little too shaggy, a little too unruly. It was whispering to me, "Mow me, Jack. Defy the lilac tyranny." I'd spent the last 7 days stewing. Every time I looked at that piece of paper, a fresh wave of indignation washed over me. 10 a.m. In the summer, that was practically noon. The sun would be a malevolent entity, beating down with the force of 1,000 angry gods. 9:45 a.m. was the sweet spot. A man has a right to his sweet spots. "I'm doing it," I announced to the empty house. I strode into the garage with the determination of a man storming a castle. My lawnmower, a trusty red Craftsman, sat waiting. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was an instrument of rebellion. I checked the gas, I checked the oil, I pulled the cord. The engine sputtered to life with a glorious, deafening roar, a sound that shattered the serene morning ambiance into a million beautiful pieces. It was the sound of freedom. I pushed the mower onto the lawn and began carving satisfyingly straight lines into the grass. The smell of fresh-cut blades and gasoline filled the air. It was intoxicating. I was 2 passes in, lost in my righteous crusade, when I saw her. It was Brenda, in the flesh. She was power-walking in a neon-pink tracksuit that could have been used to signal aircraft, a white visor pulled down so low it practically touched the tip of her nose. She didn't stop at her own property line. She didn't stop across the street. She stopped directly on the sidewalk bordering my lawn, planted her hands on her hips, and just stared. There was no yelling, no frantic waving, just a cold, silent judgment that was infinitely more terrifying. She slowly, deliberately, pulled a smartphone from an armband, aimed it at me, and I heard the distinct click of a photo being taken. An evidence photo. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "Morning, Brenda," I called out, leaning on the mower's handle with a confidence I didn't feel. "Beautiful day for some civic oversight." Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined, crisp, condescending, and utterly devoid of warmth. "It was a beautiful morning, Jack, until it was filled with the cacophony of internal combustion. It's 9:48. You received the lilac addendum, I presume?" "I did," I said, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow. "I thought it was more of a strong suggestion, a guideline, if you will." "The CC&Rs are not suggestions," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "They are the bedrock of this community, the very foundation of our property values. Expect a notice of violation in your mailbox." She paused for dramatic effect. $50? Without another word, she turned on her heel and resumed her power walk, leaving me standing in a half-mown yard, the scent of rebellion slowly fading. By the time I got inside, the official notice was already there, tucked into my mailbox. It was on the same lilac paper, but this time it included the time-stamped photo of my crime. Me, red-faced, standing next to my bright red mower. A suburban felon. I showed it to Sarah that evening. She sighed. That long, weary sigh of a woman married to a man who thinks principles are more important than peace. "Just pay the $50, Jack. It's not worth it." I held up the notice. "No," I said, my voice low and determined. "This isn't about money. This is about tyranny. And you can't fight a stupid rule with logic. You have to fight it with bigger, better stupidity." That night, after Sarah and the kids were asleep, I sat in the glow of my laptop, a man on a mission. My search history became a testament to a mind on the edge of reason. HOA legal loopholes. Creative revenge on HOA president. How to annoy neighbors legally. Can you pave your entire front yard with AstroTurf? I fell deep into a rabbit hole of malicious compliance forums. The stories were inspiring. The man who, when told he couldn't have a fence, planted a 100-foot-long, 10-foot-tall hedge. The woman who, cited for a dying lawn, painted the whole thing bright green. These were my people. I started brainstorming aloud to myself, pacing my office. What if I bought a fleet of those old-school manual push mowers? I could pay a dozen teenagers to do a synchronized lawn-cutting routine at 8 a.m. It's not gas-powered, perfectly legal. I pictured a line of scrawny kids pushing creaky mowers in perfect formation. Beautiful. Or, I continued, pointing a finger at my sleeping golden retriever, what if I get the quietest electric mower in existence and just let it run for 12 hours straight? The low, incessant hum. It would be like water torture for Brenda's ears. Then, I stumbled upon it. An article on a sustainable farming blog titled, Eco-Friendly Land Clearing. Let Nature Do the Work. It was about using goats to clear overgrown fields. I stopped pacing. An idea, a truly magnificent, monumentally stupid idea began to form in my mind. It was perfect. It was quiet. It was absurd. It was natural. My fingers flew across the keyboard. HOA Bylaws Livestock Prestigious Meadows. I pulled up the CC and Rs, that beige Bible of suburban law, and used the search function. I found dozens of pages on fence height, shed placement, satellite dishes, and the specific Pantone colors for exterior paint. I found zero, not a single word, about livestock. Next, I checked the city ordinances. There were rules about dogs and cats, limits on the number of pets, nuisance clauses about barking and waste. But the language was specific. Common household pets. Goats, I reasoned, were not common household pets. They were agricultural animals. It was a loophole, a beautiful four-legged grass-eating loophole. I shot up from my chair and ran into the bedroom, flipping on the light. Sarah groaned and rolled over. "Honey, wake up," I said, my voice buzzing with excitement. "I've found the solution to our landscaping problem. It's sustainable, it's eco-friendly, it's quiet, and it's going to drive Brenda into a state of catatonic rage." Sarah squinted at me through one eye. "Oh no, what did you do?" "I haven't done it yet," I said, a massive grin spreading across my face. "But let me ask you a hypothetical question. How do you feel about goats?" Finding a goat dealer in the age of the internet is easier than you'd think, but finding one who doesn't ask too many questions is an art form. I bypassed the professional farm suppliers and went straight to the seedy underbelly of the agricultural world, Craigslist. Tucked away in the farm and garden section, between ads for rusty tractors and free roosters, a trap if I'd ever seen one, I found my golden ticket. The ad was a masterpiece of minimalist prose. Goats for mowing, good eaters, no questions asked, cash only. The seller's name was Jebediah. The next afternoon, I told Sarah I was going to a specialty landscape supplier and drove 45 minutes out of the pristine, curated world of prestigious meadows. The manicured lawns and identical houses slowly gave way to cracked pavement, then gravel roads. The air, once scented with fabric softener and suburban ennui, started to smell of manure, damp earth, and a kind of rugged freedom I hadn't realized I missed. Jebediah's farm looked exactly like you'd expect. A slightly leaning barn, a rusted-out Ford pickup resting on cinder blocks, and a collection of fences that seemed to be held together by optimism and baling wire. Jebediah himself was a character straight out of central casting for Grizzled Farmer #1. He was old and leathery, with a face mapped by sun and suspicion. He had a couple of teeth missing, a sweat-stained baseball cap, and eyes that sized me up the second I stepped out of my clean, sensible SUV. "You the fella from the city?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. He didn't offer to shake my hand. "That's me, Jack. Hear about the landscaping equipment." "The goats," he grunted, then spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed alarmingly close to my pristine running shoes. "You want 'em for mowing?" "That's right. Eco-friendly lawn management for a gated community." I felt ridiculous saying it out loud. Jebediah squinted. "HOA, huh?" He let out a dry, raspy laugh. "Had a fella once, came from one of them places, bought a rooster from me for the same reason. Revenge. Woke the whole neighborhood up at 4 in the morning. HOA president near had a stroke. You ain't like that rooster, are you? The kind to start something you can't finish?" "I'm the kind of guy who finishes things," I said, trying to sound tougher than a man who uses pivot tables for fun. Usually with a spreadsheet, but this time, with livestock. That seemed to satisfy him. He led me to a large, chaotic pen, filled with goats of all shapes, sizes, and colors. It was a symphony of bleating, chewing, and the occasional headbutt. I knew nothing about goats, absolutely nothing. So I did what any unqualified person would do. I picked them based on personality. First, I spotted a small, wiry goat that was methodically testing every inch of the fence, looking for an escape route. "That one," I said. "He's got spirit. I'll call him Houdini." Then I saw a huge, shaggy beast with a deep, rumbling bleat that sounded uncannily like a certain Wookiee. "He's in, Chewbacca." A distinguished-looking goat with a long, flowing beard and a perpetually unimpressed expression caught my eye. He looked like he should be wearing a monocle. "Sir Reginald." Another goat, a female with a sour look on her face who seemed to be scowling at me for no reason, was an obvious choice. "Brenda." Finally, I picked a plain white one just to round out the herd. "And Snowball." Jebediah nodded, seemingly impressed by my arbitrary selections. "5 of them. That'll be 500. Cash." I counted out the bills. As I handed them over, I asked, "So any tips? What do I need to know?" He gave me a long, hard look. "Give 'em water. Don't let 'em eat your car's wiring. They'll eat anything else." That was the extent of my training. He helped me load my new landscaping team into a small, rusty livestock trailer he rented me for an extra $50. I hooked it to the back of my SUV and began the journey home. It was the longest, slowest, and loudest 45 minutes of my life. The trailer rattled, the goats bleated, and I gripped the steering wheel. A giddy, terrified smile plastered on my face. I was actually doing it. I was bringing a herd of farm animals into the heart of Brenda's beige kingdom. I pulled into my driveway well after dark, the trailer clanking behind me like a medieval war machine. I'd killed the headlights a block away, coasting in under the cover of darkness like a suburban ninja. The moment the engine cut off, a chorus of confused bleats erupted from the trailer, piercing the night's tranquility. So much for stealth. The front door opened, and Sarah stood silhouetted in the doorway, arms crossed. She had that look, the one that said, "I am choosing to love you in spite of your monumental jackassery." "You actually did it," she said, her voice flat. "You brought barnyard animals to prestigious meadows." "I brought a sustainable landscaping solution, honey," I corrected her, unlatching the trailer door. "Think of the carbon credits. We're heroes." The ramp dropped with a loud thud. One by one, the goats tentatively trotted out, their hooves clicking on the concrete driveway. They looked around, bewildered by the identical houses and perfectly edged sidewalks. I led them through the side gate into the backyard, which, thankfully, was surrounded by a sturdy 6-foot privacy fence. For now, it would be their kingdom. The first 24 hours were a blur of glorious, unforeseen chaos. The moment their hooves touched grass, they went to work. The sound of their relentless, synchronized chewing was deeply satisfying. They were a furry, four-legged mowing machine. But my initial triumph was quickly tempered by a few stark realities. First, the poop. My God, the poop! I hadn't factored it in. I had a vague, sanitized idea of farm animals, but I was not prepared for the sheer volume of waste these creatures could produce. It was like a constant, silent hailstorm of fibrous black pellets. My pristine emerald green lawn was becoming a minefield. Second, the noise. While they were certainly quieter than a lawnmower, they were not silent. At approximately 3:17 a.m., Chewbacca let out a soul-shaking, guttural bleat that sounded like a dying dinosaur. I shot upright in bed, my heart pounding, convinced a demon had taken up residence in our azaleas. Speaking of which, third, their indiscriminate palate. Jebediah had said they'd eat anything, and he wasn't kidding. By morning, they had made impressive progress on the lawn. They had also eaten the entirety of Sarah's prize-winning rose bush, a decorative wicker chair, and were starting to nibble on the vinyl siding of the house. I found Sir Reginald majestically chewing on a cardboard Amazon box I'd forgotten to take out. Despite the carnage, as I stood by the window with my morning coffee, I felt a surge of victory. The lawn was getting mowed, 24/7, with 0 carbon emissions and 0 regard for Brenda's 10 a.m. rule. My next-door neighbor, Dave, emerged to get his paper. Dave was a chill, bearded graphic designer in his 40s who viewed the HOA with the same level of disdain I did. He saw the goats. He stopped. He stared for a full 10 seconds, his mouth hanging slightly open. Then, he slowly, reverently began to clap. He walked over to the fence dividing our yards. "Dude," he said, his voice filled with awe, "this is the most glorious, magnificent, and utterly insane thing I have ever seen. Brenda is going to have a full-blown aneurysm." "That's the plan," I said with a grin. The reaction from my other side was less enthusiastic. Mr. Henderson, a grumpy retiree whose main hobby was reporting people for leaving their trash cans out for an extra 5 minutes, was already scowling from his kitchen window, a phone pressed to his ear. The battle had begun. Brenda's discovery was a moment I will cherish for the rest of my days. It was around 8 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and watching my herd of furry anarchists at work. I saw her coming from a block away, a flash of neon pink in the morning sun, power walking with the grim determination of a drill sergeant. She was in her zone, headphones on, arms pumping. She passed Dave's house, then Mr. Henderson's. As she drew level with my property line, her eyes, as if drawn by some dark magic, drifted over to my backyard. She stopped dead. Her entire body went rigid. I watched her face cycle through the 5 stages of HOA grief. Confusion. Are those deer? Disbelief. They can't be. Goats. Rage. He wouldn't dare. Bargaining. Maybe if I ignore them, they'll disappear. And finally, a cold, hard acceptance of the war that was to come. She ripped her phone from its armband and began filming, her hand shaking with righteous fury. By 10:30 a.m., a new lilac envelope was taped to my front door. This one felt heavier, more menacing. It contained a multi-page violation notice, complete with grainy, zoomed-in photos of the goats. The cited violations were a work of bureaucratic art. Unsanctioned livestock, creation of an olfactory and auditory nuisance, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain aesthetic harmony with the community. The fine was now $200, with a bold, underlined demand to remove the offending animals immediately. I decided a direct approach was in order. I found her number on the HOA portal and called. Brenda speaking, she answered, her voice clipped and professional. Hi, Brenda. Jack Riley here. From across the street. Got your fan mail. Just wanted to check which specific bylaw I'm violating. I've read the CC and R's cover to cover. It's a real page-turner, by the way, and I can't seem to find the section on goat-based horticulture. A strangled noise came from the other end of the line. You know very well what you're doing, Jack. This is a residential community, not a petting zoo. They are a nuisance. My husband said he heard one of them braying in the middle of the night. That would be Chewbacca, I said calmly. He has a deep baritone, but I assure you he's no leaf blower. And a nuisance. Brenda, these are quiet, efficient, all-natural landscaping professionals. I'm actually increasing my property value through sustainable practices. You should be giving me an award. The line went dead. She had hung up on me. An hour later, a police car rolled slowly down our street and parked in front of my house. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a weary, seen-it-all face and a name tag that read Sergeant Miller. The other was young, eager, and looked like this was the most exciting thing to happen to him all week. His tag said Officer Davies. I opened the door before they could knock. Gentlemen, can I help you? Sergeant Miller sighed, as if the entire weight of the world was on his shoulders. Sir, we got a call about, He looked down at his notepad. Some goats? My landscaping team, I said brightly. Yes, they're in the back. Hard at work. Would you like to see them? I led them through the side gate. They stopped and just stared at the scene. Sir Reginald was majestically scratching his back against a tree. Brenda the goat was eating a dandelion with extreme prejudice, and Chewbacca was standing on a plastic lawn chair. Officer Davies was visibly fighting back a grin. So, the complaint, he said, trying to sound official, is that they're eating grass? And pooping, I added helpfully. Let's be fair, there's a lot of pooping. But the noise complaint from a Mrs. Brenda is baseless. We ran decibel tests. My mower clocks in at 90 decibels. Chewbacca's loudest bleat is a mere 75. It's science. Sergeant Miller was rubbing his temples. Is there a city ordinance against this, sir? Not specifically, I said, pulling a folded printout from my back pocket. I checked. Ordinance 114B pertains to common household pets. As you can see, these are clearly uncommon professional colleagues. As long as they're contained and not a public health risk, it's a legal gray area. Brenda was now watching us from her perfectly manicured lawn across the street, her arms crossed, radiating impatience. Sergeant Miller turned and projected his voice across the street. Ma'am, it's a civil issue. It's between you and him and the HOA. There's nothing criminal happening here. He turned back to me. Sir, have a good day. Try to keep your goats from disturbing the peace. As they walked back to their car, Officer Davies glanced back at me and gave a subtle, conspiratorial thumbs up. I had won. I had the law, or at least the lack of it, on my side. The goat war had just begun, and I had taken the first major hill. The weeks that followed settled into a new, bizarre kind of normal. My life now revolved around the care and containment of 5 goats. I'd start my day not with coffee and code, but with filling water troughs and distributing hay. The lawn was a patchwork of perfectly mown areas and spots they'd ignored, all of it dotted with a generous layer of fertilizer pellets. It was a masterpiece of protest art. Houdini lived up to his name. He developed an uncanny ability to find the one loose board in the fence, the one latch that wasn't perfectly secure. His escapes became legendary. One morning, Dave called me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Jack, you need to come get your boy. He's taking a bath in Henderson's bird bath. I spent 20 minutes chasing a wet, unrepentant goat through my grumpy neighbor's prize-winning petunias. It cost me a bottle of nice whiskey to smooth things over with Mr. Henderson. Brenda, meanwhile, had escalated from lilac notes to full-blown legal warfare. A thick envelope arrived via certified mail. It was from a law firm, Dewey, Cheatham and Howe, I kid you not, and it was a formal cease and desist. It spoke of liens on my house, of daily fines retroactive to the goat's arrival, of taking me to court for diminishing the aesthetic and financial integrity of prestigious meadows. This was no longer a $50 fine. This was serious. Sarah read the letter, her face pale. "Jack, this has gone too far. They're going to sue us. We have to get rid of them." "No," I said, a new resolve hardening in my gut. "You don't back down from a bully, you double down." I looked out the window at my furry agents of chaos. They were just living in the open, exposed to the elements. They looked vulnerable, unprofessional. The lawyer's letter had said they were a nuisance. I was about to prove them wrong. I was going to show the world that I was the most responsible, dedicated goat owner in suburban history. "I'm going to build them a house," I declared. "A shelter? Like a doghouse?" Sarah asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "No," I said. "Not a shelter, a palace." The next day I called Gus, a local contractor whose number I got from Dave. Gus was a big, burly, no-nonsense guy with a beard that could have housed a family of birds. He showed up in a dusty Ford F-250 and surveyed my yard with a critical eye. "All right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Dave said you needed a shed. What size you thinking, 10 by 12? "I'm thinking bigger, Gus. And better," I said, unrolling a piece of paper on the hood of his truck. It was a sketch I'd stayed up all night drawing. "I'm thinking more of a rustic chalet. 2 levels, a feeding trough and lounge area on the first floor, insulated sleeping quarters on the second, accessible by a custom-built ramp, and the pièce de résistance." I pointed to the top of my drawing. "A small sun deck. For the goats." Gus stared at my drawing. Then he stared at me. Then he looked at the 5 goats who were currently trying to eat the tires on his truck. He was silent for a full minute. I was sure he was going to get in his truck and drive away. Finally he spoke, his voice deadpan. "A 2-story goat house with a sun deck." "Exactly," I said. "It needs to be up to code, of course. I want to get it permitted. I want this to be the most legally sound, structurally impressive goat dwelling in the history of suburban America. Can you do it?" A slow grin spread across Gus's face, cracking his stoic facade. "Son," he said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to rattle my teeth. "For the right price, I'd build a jacuzzi for a flock of pigeons. Let's do it." The construction was a spectacle. Gus and his bewildered crew descended upon my backyard, their nail guns and circular saws replacing the bleats of goats as the dominant sound in the neighborhood. The sight of a full construction team building a miniature mansion for livestock in the middle of a cookie-cutter subdivision was simply too much for people to ignore. Neighbors would wander over, drawn by the beautiful absurdity of it all. Dave brought us beers every afternoon. Mr. Henderson called the city to complain about the construction noise, a complaint that was promptly dismissed as the work was being done well after 10 a.m. The city inspector, a tired-looking man named Frank, came by to check on the permit. He walked into the backyard, looked at the half-finished structure, looked at the goats, looked at the approved plans in his hand, and just shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Well," he sighed, stamping the permit. "Never seen one of these before. Structure's sound. Have fun with your goat condo." After a week, it was finished. It was magnificent. A beautiful wooden chalet, complete with window boxes, which I left empty for obvious reasons, a shingled roof, a gentle ramp, and a glorious sun deck. I bought a wood-burning kit and carefully branded a sign above the door. Casa de la Chèvre. The House of the Goat. It was my magnum opus, my declaration that the goats were not just a temporary protest, they were residents. And it was the final push that sent Brenda and the entire neighborhood over the edge. The unveiling of Casa de la Chèvre on the prestigious Meadows community Facebook page was the digital equivalent of a cannonball splash. Dave took a series of artfully framed photos. Sir Reginald posing majestically on the sun deck, Houdini peering out a window, and posted them with the simple caption, "Welcome to the neighborhood's newest residents. They're homeowners now." The post went nuclear. Within hours, it had hundreds of comments. The neighborhood, which had been murmuring about the goat situation for weeks, was now forced to choose a side. The battle lines were drawn in the comments section. Team Brenda was fierce. "This is a disgrace. Think of the property values," wrote one person. "My child is afraid to walk past that house now," wrote another, which was ridiculous, as my goats were about as threatening as a throw pillow. But Team Goat was stronger. They were the silent majority who had been chafing under Brenda's rule for years. "This is the hero we didn't know we needed," one comment read. "Jack Riley for HOA president," said another. "My personal favorite. My son wants to know if he can do his biology report on Sir Reginald." The digital skirmish broke into the real world. A local news reporter, a young, sharp woman named Maria Sanchez, who clearly had a nose for quirky stories, saw the post. The next afternoon, a news van was parked in front of my house. I met Maria on my now famous lawn. She had a cameraman with her who immediately began getting B-roll footage of the goats. "Jack Riley?" she asked with a bright, professional smile. "Maria Sanchez, Channel 8 News. We've been following the story online. Can you tell us, in your own words, what's going on here?" This was my moment. I cleared my throat and delivered the performance of a lifetime. I framed myself as a humble homeowner, a defender of logic and liberty, pushed to extraordinary measures by an overzealous HOA. I talked about sustainability and carbon-neutral landscaping. I was David, and the HOA was a beige, rule-obsessed Goliath. "It was a simple matter of principle," I said gravely to the camera. "When a rule defies logic, sometimes the only logical response is absurdity." Maria was eating it up. "And can you introduce us to your team?" "Of course." I gestured to each goat as the camera followed. "This distinguished gentleman on the sun deck is Sir Reginald. He's our lead landscaper, a real visionary. The big fella is Chewbacca, our head of security. That's Houdini, our resident engineer, constantly testing structural integrity. And that's Brenda, the goat, that is," I clarified with a wink. "She's more of a mulcher." The camera crew then went across the street to get Brenda's side of the story. It was a strategic blunder on her part. Framed by her perfectly pruned, chemically treated rose bushes, she came across as exactly the kind of person you'd expect. "This is about community standards," she said, her voice tight with rage. "It's about protecting our investment. This isn't some backwoods farm. This is prestigious Meadows. The smell, the noise, the poop." Right on cue. From my backyard, Chewbacca let out a long, mournful, and perfectly timed bleat that echoed down the street. It was comedic gold. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. My phone immediately began to blow up. I was a local folk hero, the goat guy. People started doing slow drive-bys of my house, pointing and taking pictures. Dave, in a stroke of genius, started a GoFundMe page called the Jack Riley Goat Legal Defense Fund. It raised over $1,000 in less than 24 hours from people all over the city who hated their own HOAs. The goat war was no longer a neighborhood skirmish. It was a citywide spectacle. Brenda was publicly humiliated, legally thwarted, and now nationally mocked. The segment had been picked up by a national news aggregator. A lesser woman might have retreated, but Brenda was forged in the fires of bureaucratic conflict. She responded the only way she knew how. By calling an emergency, all hands on deck HOA meeting. The email blast went out, the subject line screaming with importance. Urgent, emergency vote on bylaw addendum 17B. The body of the email made the purpose clear. A meeting to discuss and vote upon a crucial addendum to the CC and Rs regarding the prohibition of non-domesticated, agricultural, or otherwise unconventional animals within prestigious meadows. It was the Anti-Goat Amendment. The showdown was set for Thursday night at the community clubhouse. I prepared for that meeting like I was preparing for a Supreme Court argument. I compiled a 3-ring binder. It contained glossy 8x10 photos of the goats looking majestic and non-threatening. It had printouts of the city ordinances I'd found, highlighted and tabbed. It had a copy of the original plat map for the subdivision I'd dug up from the county records office. Sarah, who was now firmly on Team Goat, helped me write and rehearse a speech. Dave acted as my campaign manager, rallying our supporters via text message, urging them to show up. Thursday night, the clubhouse was packed. I'd never seen more than 10 people at an HOA meeting. Tonight, there must have been over 100. The room was crackling with tension, a palpable divide between the two factions. Team Brenda, mostly older residents and sticklers for rules, sat on the right, arms crossed. Team Goat, a mix of younger families, rebels, and people who just enjoyed the drama, sat on the left. It looked like a middle school dance. Brenda, standing at a podium, called the meeting to order. She launched into a PowerPoint presentation. It was a masterwork of pettiness. Slide after slide of blurry, zoomed-in photos of goat droppings, a graph charting the decline of serene morning ambience, a sound clip of Chewbacca bleating. It was meant to be horrifying, but the people on my side of the room were openly snickering. Then she yielded the floor for my rebuttal. I walked to the podium, my binder in hand. Friends, neighbors, fellow beige house dwellers, I began, my voice echoing slightly in the tense room. We're here tonight to talk about goats. And yes, on the surface, it's ridiculous. I will be the first to admit that. But it's also about something more. This isn't about 5 goats. It's about one rule, a rule so silly, so arbitrary, that the only logical response was, well, more absurdity. I made my case. I wasn't breaking any current rules. The goats were well cared for, as evidenced by their luxury chalet. They were, despite Brenda's dramatic sound clip, far quieter than the landscaping crews that descended on our neighborhood every Tuesday at 10:01 a.m., with a fleet of gas-powered noise machines. I presented a petition, signed by over 40% of the homeowners, expressing their support for me, or at the very least, their amusement. Brenda, seeing she was losing the room, tried to cut me off. Your time is up, Jack. We need to vote on the new bylaw. Just one more thing, Brenda, I said, holding up a hand. I pulled the old plat map from my binder and unfolded it. I did a little digging down at the county clerk's office. This is the original zoning map for our lovely subdivision, filed in 1978. I held it up for everyone to see. And I'd like to point out one interesting little detail. According to the original, and still legally binding documents, Prestigious Meadows is zoned as semi-rural agricultural. It was never legally rezoned to residential. So technically, we're all living on a farm. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. I looked directly at Brenda, who had gone pale. Brenda, your prize-winning roses? By law, that's a cash crop. My goats? They're just livestock right at home. Pandemonium. Brenda stood at the podium, speechless, her jaw hanging open. Dave seized the moment and called for a vote on Addendum 17B. It failed spectacularly, with a resounding chorus of nays. Then he made a new motion. I moved to repeal the addendum prohibiting mowing before 10 a.m. The ayes were deafening. It was a total, crushing, and hilarious victory. A month later, prestigious Meadows was a different place. The 10 a.m. mowing rule was a distant, laughable memory. Brenda, in a final dramatic act of defiance, had resigned as HOA president and put her house up for sale. A quiet, more reasonable, retired accountant named George had taken her place. The Beige Kingdom was under new management. The goats had become local celebrities. Kids would stop by after school to feed them carrots through the fence. They were fat, happy, and had eaten my lawn down to the dirt. Their work was done. As much as I'd grown to love my furry co-conspirators, I knew they were creatures of the country, not the cul-de-sac. It was time for them to go home. I called Jebediah. He showed up a few days later with his rattling trailer. "Heard you won your war," he said, a rare smile cracking his leathery face as we loaded the goats. Sir Reginald walked up the ramp as if he owned the place. "We won the battle," I corrected him. "It was a team effort." I gave Chewbacca a final scratch behind the ears. "I'm going to miss these guys." "Tell you what," Jebediah said, closing the trailer door. "You did him a service, gave him a little vacation from the farm. Anytime you need to make a point with your new HOA president, you give me a call." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Got a llama that's real good at making a statement. Spits like a champ." I laughed and shook his hand. I watched the trailer drive away, rattling down the quiet suburban street until it was gone. Sarah came out and put an arm around my waist, looking at the patchy, poop-fertilized disaster area that was once our lawn. "So," she said, "I guess you'll be needing that lawnmower again." The next morning was a beautiful, clear Saturday. The air was cool. At exactly 9:45 a.m., I wheeled my trusty red Craftsman out of the garage. I pulled the cord. The engine roared to life. It was no longer a sound of defiance. It was a sound of freedom, of absurdity, of a $50 fine that had spiraled into a local legend. I smiled, pushed the mower forward, and began to reclaim my lawn, on my own terms,